Hello, everyone, and welcome to Neurocracy. Today, we are joined by Dr. Helen Burgess, who is a professor of psychiatry and co-director of the Sleep and Circadian Laboratory at the University of Michigan. Her research extensively focuses on the effects of light on human circadian rhythms, particularly emphasizing how carefully timed morning light can have profound health outcomes. She also actively engages in public outreach and advocacy to translate circadian science into society. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks for having me.
It's great. Your research highlights the importance of morning light exposure for aligning circadian rhythms. Could you explain why the timing of this light is so crucial?
Yes, definitely I can dig into that. I guess before I talk about the timing of light, I'll quickly mention that what's interesting is when I started in the field many years ago, our model at the time was really that light came in through the eyes and it went to the central circadian clock, the suprachiasmatic nuclei, and the hypothalamus. And from there, that light signal was sort of, I guess, then sent out across the brain. But since then, I know you've had conversations with others about what we think of as the primary circadian photoreceptor in the retina. They contain melanopsin. Their full name is a mouthful, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. Sometimes we call them iPRGCs, but it can be easier just to refer to them as the circadian photoreceptors. So since then, there's been really, really nice work where people have actually traced the projections of those circadian photoreceptors across the brain. And what's that has shown us is that sure, there is a direct path to the circadian clock, but there's also some direct signaling to mood centers, for example, the amygdala, and some signaling to some of the sleep centers as well. So we are very circadian focused, of course, but one of the ways that we've been able to promote the use of morning light is not just its circadian impact, but potentially it's a direct impact on mood and sleep as well. But yes, the timing of light becomes quite critical. And one of the most fascinating things about the circadian system, to me, is that you can have exactly the same, what we might think of as a light pulse or a light exposure. And if that occurs in the evening or the sort of roughly the first part of your sleep, obviously we're not usually exposed to light at that time if it's our usual sleep period, but let's say something unusual happened and you happen to be up at that time, your brain interprets that as evening light and it will shift your clock later. And I think you've learned through conversations with others that we already tend to be on the late side. Most of us don't need to be pushed any later. But that precise same pulse of light, if applied in the morning or about an hour or so before you normally wake up, it's exactly the same light. There's nothing different about it except the timing. The fact it's now seen by the brain as morning light then advances the clock or shifts it a little bit earlier. And that's what most of us need. Most of us benefit from that. So sometimes people think morning light, great. I'm going to get up 4 hours earlier this morning and I'm going to get my light. The problem with that sort of drastic approach is that actually that could lead to your brain thinking of that as evening light and push your clock the wrong way. So in our studies, we very carefully monitor people's just typical usual sleep patterns for about a week. We put a Fitbit on them. We get a sense of what they normally do. And once we have that objective data, then we kind of roughly calculate an average wake time and we have a conversation with them and we say, what do you think about starting the light treatment at this time at your average wake time? And a lot of people can do that. Some people might say, well, I can't fit an hour-long light treatment into my morning routine, in which case we say, okay, we'll let you get up an hour earlier because we still think that's on the safe side. It's not too early. But then we encourage them to go to bed an hour earlier as well so they don't sleep deprive themselves. But we don't tend to want to start the light treatment more than an hour before average wake time because there's just too much of a risk that the circadian clock will think of that as evening light and people will get pushed the wrong way and we get worried that that could actually make things worse.
Right. So when you're talking about light, are you specifically referring to sunlight, or are there any other types of artificial light that have similar effects?
Yeah, so sunlight in many ways is the best. It's often the brightest. It has a lot of blue wavelengths light, which we know the circadian photoreceptors are most sensitive to, most responsive to. Um, and probably, in terms of the eye, probably the only bad thing happening in outdoor light is UV, because too much UV sometimes is not great for the eyes. Um, and so if people want morning light and the weather is cooperating and it's not raining and it's not too hot and not too cold, then going out, soon after you wake up for a walk or something like that is perfect. It's great. But of course, that's not always possible. And so indoor light is better than nothing and can certainly help. And there's studies showing that indoor light exposure can definitely shift circadian rhythms, particularly repeated exposures. But otherwise, in our research, we use light devices and we originally used light boxes.
Yeah.
The only issue with light boxes is that people tend to have to sit in front of them for an hour. So now we've moved on to using a wearable light device. There are different ones out there. The one that we tested and liked the best and we use in our clinical trials is called the retimer. So it's sort of these light glasses people wear, and they have LEDs that the peak wavelength's about 500 nanometers. So it's a bluey green light, and it's hitting reasonably close to the peak sensitivity of those circadian photoreceptors. So um, we see responses similar to using a big bright white light box.
So, are there any stories of these trials or of these tests that show promise for future interventions that can improve circadian rhythm alignment?
Um, yeah, there's so all of this work. I mean, one of my favorite stories, if you'll indulge me, I could tell you about was way back, way back when I guess ni 1960s, 1970s. The feeling at that time was that surprisingly humans were not that sensitive to light. That
Oh,
was the sort of
wow.
prevailing theory. There was a lot of work being done in rodents, and they're very sensitive to light. So they were able to show that we could phase shift rhythms, and things like that, running patterns, with light, but not necessarily seeing that in humans. And part of that was, I think, the sensitivity of the assays. So how the rhythms were being measured, it just wasn't
Yeah.
there necessarily to pick up these smaller shifts. But one of the stories is a researcher called Al Louie, who's quite well known in the field. He lives in Portland, Oregon, and he was traveling to Australia, and he was visiting colleagues in Australia, and it was his first day or two having arrived. And he thought about it and realized, oh, at home, I would normally be sleeping at this time, and I should have some high levels of melatonin. And he helped develop some of the melatonin assays. And so he was very familiar with melatonin. So he actually took a sample of his own blood
Yeah.
and had it assayed and noticed that there was pretty much no melatonin in there. And then he had this light bulb moment where he realized we just haven't been using bright enough light in these human studies. That's the issue. So he went back to Portland and he kind of helped make up these big light boxes, and then, sure enough, he was able to show that people's melatonin was suppressing, just as it does in animals when they're exposed to light. And that actually opened the door. That was a 1980 science paper that he published,
Wow.
and that opened the door to suddenly the field saying, oh my goodness, humans really are responsive to light.
Yeah.
And the first application of that was really for winter depression, seasonal affective disorder. And it is the first line treatment for winter depression is morning light treatment.
Wow.
And then that spilled over to treatment for non-seasonal depression. We know morning light treatment now is as effective as pharmaceutical antidepressants
Wow.
in terms of the effects. And then other people in the field, including myself, have then taken that into different clinical disorders where potentially you're looking for some mood improvement, but maybe a little bit of sleep improvement, and maybe also a circadian advance could be helpful. So we've been doing a lot of testing in different pain conditions. We've done testing and published in PTSD. We have a study in inflammatory bowel disorder right now.
Wow.
So yeah, so we're starting to take it into other clinical disorders that maybe initially we wouldn't have thought of, but it is so far, at least in what we're doing, it's proving to be quite beneficial. And honestly, I can tell you that clinical patients love it
Yeah.
because in many of these disorders, there's pretty meaningful side effects to the medications that they're put
Right.
on.
Right. Yeah.
And particularly in the case of fibromyalgia, for example, as one of our studies, this chronic widespread pain condition. The literature is very clear that the side effects are so strong, a lot of people stop treatment. So by the time they come to us and they're interested, like, oh, I'm so looking for something that's non-pharmacological. Um, and yeah, there's just a lot of interest in trying to incorporate it into their daily routine.
Yeah.
Basically, it's kind of considered a more natural
Yeah. Yeah.
way potentially to help themselves.
So, in your work advocating for the practical applications of circadian science, have you ever faced any significant barriers like societal or systemic obstacles to translating this research into practical?
Um, Not necessarily. I mean, I guess
Okay.
when we think of stigma, depression, of course, always has some stigma associated with it. I think that's improving these days. So potentially positioning morning light as an antidepressant may carry some of that stigma. I think, honestly, it's probably easier when we talk about sleep and circadian rhythms. I think everybody, particularly as people get older, like, oh, I think I need some help with my sleep. That sounds wonderful. So I think that's more where people might be a way to sort of grab the attention of people. But we tend to have fairly irregular schedules. People, I think, are not as aware of just how important having a regular schedule is, having that regular light exposure, and how that can really set the timing, but also very importantly, stabilize the timing of the circadian clock and just how much of an impact that can have on our well-being,
Yeah.
how much better we feel, we perform, our health obviously is optimized, things like that.
Do you believe it has applications to helping people recover from maybe chronic sleep loss or um,
Potentially, potentially, yeah, we're doing a study right now in collaboration with folks at Johns Hopkins.
okay.
We're actually I think there's been one other group that has done this combination therapy in adolescents, but otherwise it really hasn't been done in adult patients. So
Okay.
we're combining the number one treatment for insomnia, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is really just educating people about sleep, what to do when they hit problems, they have some sleep disturbance. And we're interested in combining that with morning light treatment and seeing if we see even greater improvements in sleep and mood. And we're doing this in people about 8 weeks or so before they're scheduled to have knee replacement surgery. And then we track them after the surgery, and we're interested to see. Our hypothesis is that by improving their sleep and circadian alignment ahead of time, we'll see reduced pain reports post-surgery and reduced use of opioids. It's kind of what we're
Uh,
looking for there. So there's many different applications, but I am excited. You know, in the early work that we did, we had to really just focus on morning light treatment alone, obviously, to try and get a handle on it and what the effects look like. And those early trials were very promising. And so we have our fibromyalgia trial right now is a pretty large trial of 400 people.
wow.
So because our earlier study with just 60 people had quite promising results, so we were funded by NIH to move to
Oh,
this larger clinical trial. And now we're able to move morning light treatment with CBTI. And I would hope down the road, maybe we could think about morning light treatment combined with an exercise program, for example. So starting to combine some of these modalities together to see if we can get even improved or enhanced health benefits from it.
yeah. So one of the topics I talk about a lot here is high school schedules, but I want to
Yeah.
hear your take on U Michigan. And if there are two things
Oh,
you could change about the campus, it could be any particular part of campus, but if there are two specific policy changes or scheduling changes you'd want to implement at U Michigan, that are based on circadian science, what would those two things be?
yeah, so that's a very good question. So I'm in Department of Psychiatry, which obviously you can see on the screen there. I am in the medical school. But we're tucked away on the East Campus, so I have to say I'm not even really down on the main campus
Oh,
that much. But we are in an absolutely beautiful building
that's
that it's called the Rachel Upjohn Building, and it has this beautiful atrium in it, which lets in a lot of light. So there are all of the offices and rooms along the outside of the building, and some in the middle have some really, really nice light exposure. And the back area of the building has been developed to have little picnic tables and stuff out there. And particularly right now in the summertime, there's a lot of staff and faculty take advantage to have their lunch outside, get
yeah.
some light exposure. Even in the middle of the day, we know that light exposure can have some benefits. So that's wonderful. And actually, while I think about it, the entire back of the building, at least on the ground level, is all glass. So there's
Oh,
tons of light coming in. I will say there are a few offices that don't have windows. And there is a literature suggesting that if you work in an office without a window, your mood can be a bit poorer, your sleep can be a little bit poorer. So in those offices, it would be great to try and introduce some blue light for people to be exposed to during their working day, and at least encourage them potentially to try to move to some of the shared spaces in which there is some natural light. But overall, based on sort of where I'm located and what I see, I feel like we're doing a pretty good job. I think light is definitely appreciated in my department for sure.
and I've noticed what you said about like the glass, especially at my high school. So my Latin class is right in the middle of the entire high school, and it's as far as you can possibly be from the outdoors. And the teacher, we make jokes about how there's no sunlight, and I think the kids always want to go outside, like me included. And I think we joke about it a lot, but I also think that based on this literature and also just like understanding of light exposure, that it might actually have some implications on mood, right?
Yeah, and circadian rhythms and shifting circadian rhythms, that's a slower process that can take a day or two. But light also has immediate mood enhancing and alerting effects. So honestly, if your teacher just wants the class to maybe be a bit more alert, um, potentially having some classes outside. I even remember back when I was in high school, we had one teacher who, when the weather was good, was like, right, we're going outside for this class.
Yeah.
And you might think that that would turn into this, sort of chaos, but actually we all really loved it. And I mean, obviously to this day, I'm still remembering those classes and how great they
Yeah.
were. So I think that's a good option for sure.
Yeah. I'll talk to my teacher about it. See if administration can do anything. But I think it's because it's the Latin class, so it's the language class with the least amount of people signed up. So I don't think they give us.
So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe more feasible. And the other thing is honestly, teachers know what they're doing. They can say, hey guys, we're going to try this. And if it just,
Yeah.
turns into chaos, we won't do it again. And I think everyone gets the message then of like, yeah, let's be focused so that we can make this work and we can do it again.
So, given your expertise with circadian rhythms, are there any specific daily habits that you practice to personally maintain your circadian health and sleep?
There are. Um, so I think a lot of the people you talked to already, we follow a pretty regular schedule.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I want to make sure I'm getting enough sleep, but I follow a pretty regular schedule. Um, and that tends to flow into the weekend as well. So, pretty regular schedule. Morning light. Um, we are lucky. I work at home 2 days a week, and then I'm in the lab 3 days a week, and at home and also in my office, actually, very nice big windows. So a lot of exposure, to natural light. In the winter time, if I feel like I need a bit of a boost, I will use the retimers in the morning. They only go for an hour and then they automatically turn off, so I'll pop them on soon after I wake up. I wear an eye mask at night, um, mostly because we don't have blinds on our windows. That's kind of the way my husband likes it. But I do feel at nighttime I can be quite light sensitive. And there is an interesting emerging literature right now that even dim light at night can induce some circadian disruption. potentially contributing towards more depression, weight gain, things like that. A lot of these effects can be small, but it's really the repeated exposure to them over many days and weeks, months and years, in which I think some of these effects occur. So I do wear an eye mask at nighttime. Um, and in summertime, one thing I've been trying to do, which I haven't always been great about doing, is in the middle of the day, taking a break to go sit outside. Um, Even if it's just 10 or 15 minutes in the middle of the day, because there is some suggestion in the field that not only is there the immediate mood enhancement, but if I'm exposed to brighter light during the day, I'm potentially less sensitive to the evening light that we all
Oh,
receive after sunset. And so that evening light exposure may in some ways be less disruptive if I've had more morning light during the
okay.
day. So people are starting to focus and making the valid point that yes, evening light and morning light are very important, but we should maybe start thinking about our 24-hour light exposure as well as something to think about. So I have been trying to go outside during the day and get a bit more light exposure.
So when you mentioned like 10 to 15 minutes, that invited the question to me, is there any specific duration of time or intervals in which going outside is specific? Is there like a threshold for, um,
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember a while ago hearing about a study that was just looking at actually the impact of going into green space during the day.
okay.
And I believe that study found after about 20 minutes or so, there would be a decrease in cortisol. So basically, some sort of de-stressing effect of being out in green space. In terms of circadian effects, there have been lab-based studies where they've looked at the duration of light, um, and they've looked at phase shifts and melatonin suppression. And those lab studies suggest that after 4 hours of light exposure, there's kind of a saturation effect. For our clinical work, we thought, well, that's great, but no one's going to want to do a light treatment for 4 hours. And so we go with the 1 hour treatment. In our earlier PTSD study, we actually did test three different doses. It was 15 minutes every morning, 30 minutes every morning, or the hour every morning. And one of the outcomes we were looking at was actually amygdala reactivity to fearful stimuli. And often the amygdala in people with PTSD, depression, anxiety, different disorders will have an overactive amygdala that's kind of over responsive. And we were able to show, this was a study that used fMRI, we were able to show that all three treatments, to some extent, well, they all three reduced amygdala reactivity, which was a good thing. But we did see the biggest effect with the 1 hour. The 15-minute didn't do necessarily, it did a little bit, not a whole lot, and then the 30-minute. But that really confirmed to us that clinically, if people can do an hour, that's great. That seems to have the largest effects, but also still be somewhat practical. So I say 10 or 15 minutes because first of all, that's usually the time I can find in between meetings. But also it can be incredibly hot and sunny outside.
Oh yeah.
And, if it's 89 degrees, 10 or 15 minutes is probably going to be my max anyway. But if it's cooler than that and people want to spend more time outside, I would say definitely do that.
So when we were talking earlier about wearable tech, it made me a little excited for like the future of maybe like glasses with certain features, maybe like light exposure effects. So I'm
Mm.
curious, what does the future of wearable tech look like for circadian impact in the next maybe 5 to 10 years? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, I I think what would be fantastic is to basically be able to personalize light treatments in some ways in real time based on, you've had a day perhaps where you really haven't received, it's been a dim day, rainy day, you had some paper due, you've been working, maybe you have a basement apartment, something like that. You've just been working all day and if we were able to get there where maybe you're wearing some sort of wearable that has a photo sensor and it's picked up that you really haven't received a lot of light that day. And then you'll wake up
Uh,
in the morning and just as we get our morning alerts or, you'll get your sleep report or whatever. There could be some sort of recommendation of like, hey, today would be a great day to do this. Or I think the one of the biggest hurdles we're facing right now is it's not easy to necessarily have a good estimate of an individual's circadian timing.
Okay.
Um,
Huh.
the gold standard measure of circadian timing right now in humans is to measure the melatonin rhythm, which is sort of arduous and it's a 6 hour process with saliva sampling and all of this kind of stuff. The
Yeah.
field has recognized this for a long time, and there's two different approaches people have taken to try and get around that. One is looking at wearable activity data and using that to mathematically try and predict where people's circadian timing is. And then the other one is taking some blood samples
Yeah.
and basically looking at protein levels. So far, those are working pretty well in your typical sort of daytime worker where they can estimate circadian timing or the melatonin onset within about an hour of where it is, which is pretty good. The issue, however, is the prediction. The accuracy of that prediction falls apart anytime you're looking at people with some sort of circadian disruption. And particularly in the case of the clinical patients that I look at, they have very irregular sleep schedules. And unfortunately, we can't do it. So the people that need the most circadian guidance are going to be the people in which we struggle the most to
Right.
try and accurately track their circadian timing. But I would love it if we get there where we can do that. And I think it's possible. I think we will get there. We're just not there right now.
And I just wanted to say when you mentioned that blood test. So I
Yeah.
was looking at Northwestern's research on, are you aware of the time
Yes.
signature? I
Yes.
thought it was super cool. Could you elaborate on that maybe? I mean, I looked
Yeah,
at it a little
so
bit, but
one of the leaders of that, Ravi Allada, I just have to, promote Michigan. He's come over here now. He's the head of the
oh,
Michigan Neuroscience Institute.
wow. Cool.
So we're very lucky to have him. But I'll describe it in, the basic way that I
Yeah.
understand it, which is essentially you can bring, and they did bring a whole lot of different people into the lab,
Yeah.
and in very, very careful lab experiments, we're essentially collecting blood from them every hour or every 2 hours. And then you obviously can assay that blood for a whole bunch
Yeah.
of different proteins. And through all of that, the way I think of it anyway, is they've kind of created a library, if you will. And these were healthy individuals. Um, and they also, of course, they're measuring the dim light melatonin onset, the measure of circadian timing in these individuals as well. And then they run all this through, various machine learning algorithms, all of this kind of stuff. And then they apply it by having people out in the field will come in, they'll give one or maybe two blood samples, and that will get assayed for, again, these hundreds of proteins, various things. And then they give that to the algorithm and say, okay, based on the various levels of all of these different things in this one particular blood sample, give us your best estimate of where the dim light melatonin onset is. And like I said, it works great for people with pretty regular schedules,
Right.
daytime workers. It works great. It's not yet there for people with more irregular schedules. And as a clinical researcher, I mean, I think that's very exciting. I lean a little bit more towards estimating circadian timing from wearables
Okay.
because not everyone wants to give a blood sample. Not
Yeah.
everyone wants to travel into the lab to do that. But we're in the very early stages right now. I've had conversations with Ravi about maybe thinking about combining these two different approaches. Can we
Oh.
get better prediction if we mix the blood work in with the wearable data? Can we do even better? So certainly discussions about that. I hope we get there one
Yeah,
day.
it's super cool how you happen to be working or someone who is from that project. I think it's super cool how
Yeah.
a lot of people in this field know each other and have worked with each other or maybe like build off
Yeah,
of something.
it's a
But
pretty small field in a
yeah,
way. The sleep field is a lot bigger, but the circadian field is a lot smaller. And I think
right.
the Society for Research on Biological Rhythms
Yeah.
that I think you're familiar with, those meetings, I think at the most, I don't know, I'm probably have about 400 or 500 people. They're typically in one location, and the idea is that everyone stays around that location for lunch and everything. And it's during those breaks where the really great conversations can
Oh,
happen and you
yeah.
get to know people. So I think we're fortunate in some ways that we're still a fairly small society. So everyone kind of gets to know each other and their work. And I also think we um, I like to think we do a really nice job of looking at some of the basic circadian research that happens, and then also working out, okay, how can we translate that? And I think there's been a lot of really great work where the two worlds kind of come together a little
Yeah,
bit, which I'm not sure always happens, but
yeah,
it's exciting.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure
Oh.
talking to you, and I'm glad you got to share some of your knowledge with me and the podcast to whoever's watching. Um, yeah, it was truly a pleasure having you and talking to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, good luck with your program. I think obviously the more we can get
Yeah,
circadian and sleep science out there, the better. So it's great. Thank you for doing it.
thank you.